Hello everyone and most welcome to H686. We will today talk about temporalization. The background to this article is the insight into how seldom thinking and acting goes together. Almost always we tend to think after the action is already initiated. And this is something that's been shown more than clearly by Mr. Libet in his famous research. We act before we think. And it's also this relationship many people in different strands of knowledge pointed out. It's a lack of timing. So we do things and then we think. It's the habituated tendency to response. We are conditioned, and in this conditioning we get something that is called dysponesie. It's pre-enactment, too hastily acting on the things, we could say. We have to remember too hastily means in this case only preemptive. It doesn't necessarily have to mean that it's quick. It's preemptive. Actually, we know from extended studies that it becomes slower because we have two actions. First, we have the reflective or the direct action on the impulse, on the stimuli, and then we have a second compensating action. And this goes for this very typical trait of dysponesie that is a sort of trembling effect. Healthy individuals does not show this trembling effect. So this is a clear sign that it's two action going on at the same time, two directions, that causes the trembling. We do not use we're not aware of the trembling because we usually act too rapid in a normal speed for it to be obvious. And this can be compared to riding a bike that is out of sync. Maybe the tires are a little bit unbalanced. I had that experience many times. Bicycles get old and their wheels get unbalanced. What you can do is heighten the speed to a certain level, and the speed actually will balance out the wheels that are unbalanced. And that is the reason I'm standing here and my movements still look fairly accurate. It's this balancing we get from doing things in a rapid motion, well, half rapid. This is something that's very obvious in even more severe cases like Parkinson's patients. Parkinson's patients are not even able to make things in a normal speed, which I show here. They have to do it even quicker to get over the resistance to act. There is a sort of threshold to act. So they have to do it quickly, and typically Parkinson patients get standing in doorways because they have to, like all of us, stop a little bit in the doorway before entering a new room. And in this stopping, they stop their whole motion. Their motion gets stopped because they're suffering even more from dysponesia. And what you do in that case, you have to help them. They have to give them a hand, not a big pull. You don't have to pull the whole body weight, but you just give them a direction and a sort of energy, and they get into the room over the threshold. This was actually something investigated by Oliver Sacks, I think it was. And there was another doctor, I don't recall now because I just remember that became a movie called Awakening. And there was a whole department on a hospital with patients that were completely immovable. They didn't move at all, or hardly anything. And this doctor, young doctor, came to the institution, and he noticed after being there for a while that the patients didn't move. They moved, but very, very slow. It took ages for them to move from sitting position to the window, but they did move intentionally. And when he discovered that, he first thought they were actually moving very slowly, which is obvious, but then he noticed there were several directions going on in the same time. So what he actually gave to them in the end was sort of a suppressant, not a stimuli. And with this suppressant in the brain, they started to move about. They suffered from a specific disease that was plaguing, I think it was in New York in the 30s, something like that. And he put them to life again, and that's why the movie is called Awakening. They've been gone because their mental processes were also blurred by this rapid movement. So it was like they were still young, but they have they have stayed in the institution for many years. It's a very moving picture, I can recommend it. But it also shows here that different directions can actually slow down the movement or make it very, very hard to do. And it's energy consuming to send first one action, and then you have to couple that with a second action that actually comes from the consciousness, but it's delayed. We talked about this delay earlier, and it's about 0.2 seconds. It could actually be a little bit more. But what we need to make to get over this dyspnosis, this trembling, is to make thinking and action go in concert. They have to come together. But what we have to start with, if we want to do that, is we have to, in the beginning, start the tendency to preemptive react. We have to stop the disposition in us to act too early. One could say the problem is somebody approached me, for instance, my colleague, he doesn't have to move, just to make it more vivid in my mind. He approaches me, and that gives a stimuli for me to act in a certain way. But the stimuli is sent from the wrong direction. It's a preconceived idea of what the other person wants. And this is very, very common, of course, if you go downtown and you meet people and it's too narrow for two people to pass. Some people have a tendency to blur things completely and move first to the left and then to the right. And then you meet these people who actually look at the situation and they go right, and you don't stumble into each other. This is what I'm looking for. I have a preconceived idea that is a little bit too strong, it's too determined, so I don't have an appropriate reactions to what's actually happening. In some cases, it's almost like I am performing things that are completely dry. There's nothing around me that induces those actions. And in the end, that is modern man in a nutshell. We know today that this dyspnosis sounds grave, but it's actually the most common thing. And it if it left to its own doing, it's going to elevate this thing, and it will cause T2 and to grow exponentially in the end. And that will mean that amygdala will be involved as well, and we're going to have scare reflexes even to a greater extent, flight and fight mood. Which of course put a horrible strain to the system. So, how do we stop action? Yeah, in Frederick Matthias Alexander, it's inhibition, it's called. But inhibition is sort of tricky. He knows how to do it. Some people do know how to do it, and I think the most of us don't know how to do it. We can do to a certain extent. If we got loads of time, we can do inhibition and we can decide not to react. But it's very hard to do it on a small basis when it comes to the small reactions. And here I come to something called ultra slow motion. And that comes from the article by Ken Ware I showed the other day. And he's very interested. It's done extensive research, not only by the team of Ken Ware, which is now a whole concern. It's a whole business now. They do their own research, but also research that's been done since the 70s outside. So the article by Sarah Ross is quite extraordinary. Even it's very small, it does have massive references to very fine underpinned research. It's extensive. Actually, the paper should be in a bigger format, I think, with all those references. But Ken Ware started before the research, but he had gone into it more. And if we do micro movements or slow movements in a time scale that is lower than 2.5 centimeters per second, we will not be able to send those preemptive signals. That will be a stop to that. And you usually get some sort of trembling effect. And if it's very small, you can only see it in an electroencephalogram. But sometimes it's actually visible. And by going down to that level, the system notices the trembling, even if you can't feel it consciously. And this is, we know, that makes a feedback to the central system, and that will slow down the system. It will stop the preemptive. It notices that there's something wrong, and it heals itself. And you can actually see this is akin to what I mentioned yesterday on the hill, that the system heals itself. It has that as a function. It just needs to be told that something's wrong. So what we usually do, we do our movements in a fairly decent speed, and that helps us to get over the tremor, the indecisiveness. But to further it down to here, we make it acute. We make it unsupportable, and the system breaks down, and what kicks in is the true working system. So this is enforcing chaos, you could say, in a little term, and that could be equal to defibrillation, giving a shock to the system, and what we get instead is a new strange attractor, which is sane, which is not preemptive, which is stronger and can make us move in a way that's much more forceful and decided. This is what Ken Ware did to this famous person, an athlete that was a paragletic since 25 years ago in his life. He had an accident as a young adult, and he was not even able to breathe for himself in the beginning. He was that badly off. Among this method and other methods, is now walking fairly well, which is more than a miracle, more than enough to Hollywood to make a movie out of it. I will try to find it. I was looking yesterday, and it could only be handled for a large sum of money, but I'll see if I can find it. It's quite interesting as such. So what happens when the system lowers down is that the system understands that the initial conditions are wrong. It's not coming from a sound way, because we are deciding before. And you can actually get a feeling for that. Already, all of a sudden you will notice that thought is not fitting here. That thought, that action doesn't fit the purpose. You see the thought, and instead of acting on it, you leave it be. And that is inhibition in a nutshell. When I read Ken Ware and the article by him and Susanne Ross, there's a very accurate description of what inhibition actually is. The thoughts are still coming. There's still some sort of temptation there, but you can finally ignore that temptation. I do have an example. I heard it some weeks ago. It made me laugh, and I shouldn't laugh in this instance. But put to a greater scale, this could be even more understandable. It was a person that complained on the radio, and she was trying to stop drinking. And she said something that sounded a bit silly in my ears. She said, all of a sudden I was sitting at the pub having a beer. I didn't know what happened. So this could happen if you are very stressed. You will lose even the ability to regulate actions that are quite big, like going to a pub, order a beer and sit down and have it. And I think she was honest, but it sounded ridiculous in a way. In the end, I had to give her this specific medicine called Antabus. It's a drug that makes you violently sick if you take any alcohol. But she could not. She didn't even know that she was doing these things, and then you can't stop it. This is the point I want to make. If you don't know you have these thoughts and you act on them, how could you stop them? No, you cannot. And Antabus is not the solution in the long run. You can't use Antabus all your life. We know that people stop using Antabus in the end. Could possibly have effects on the body. I don't know about that. But what we get is tremors, very, very small tremors, and it's all of a sudden the movement, if you go down here, it's defined, it's sharp, and you go slower, and it's almost like a trembling going on. And the next time you do the same movement, maybe a couple of days later, you will notice the trembling ceases. Something happened. And this is continuating because there's a feedback to the system, and this is automatic. That's one of the fundamental thing in Kenwell. This is automatic. You don't do anything. So this is actually a big comfort for the people struggling with inhibition in Alexander technique, in all strolls of life, because we always need inhibition. So with extended practice, the self-adjustment starts to kick in, helping us also to be consciously aware that there are preemptive misfirings. We call it misfirings. It's like shooting a gun in all directions, and there are actions that do not fit the purpose or the situation. And is this unnatural or rather non-habitual slowing down of the system that makes it possible to put an edge, a little space in between the stimuli we receive and our reaction, because we can't tell them apart. And in this instance, Sarah Ross had extensive research to show that. Benjamin Libet is just one in many. And normally one could say they are so closely knitted together, they are perceived by the system to be exactly the same thing. But we finally, after some training in the Canware program, the changes started to erupt after a couple of weeks already. It goes fairly quickly. Of course, in the Institute you get a lot of encouragement and do things that are harder to convince oneself to do. But in the end there's a space, and so to say, the system can see what happens. So think of a movie that is going in ultra speed, and you look at the movie, maybe it's a short clip. There are actually such clips on YouTube, and you are supposed to guess what's happening in the clip, and it's so fast, and then it's lowered down. You can actually on YouTube lower down the speed yourself, and then maybe 4 times the natural speed you can see what's happening. This is exactly the same thing. Lower down the speed so we'll be able to see what's happening, and then it's the healing process away from dysponosis. Once it's sounder, we can go back to normal speed, almost normal speed, and then you will have the effect at half speed, and then the effect will be in normal speed, and then you can have the effect even in double the speed, and it goes up that way. Once the system begins to learn, your whole organism is starting to integrate in these impressions. One could say we also get a possibility when we do this quick action, when we make this decided action, to take in more of our embodied knowledge, what we know to be the best thing to do in the context. And that's always hard. I think I read an example 2 years ago from, I don't know if it was James Clear, but he wrote there was some fireman in the wood. No, it was Kahneman. There was some fireman in the wood somewhere in Canada that were let down by a helicopter to help fight the fire, wood fire, and something happened with the wood fire. Massive wind erupted and other circumstances, and they were sort of trapped, and they made ready to be consumed by the fire and started praying, giving up, but somebody managed to slow down the thinking process and saw that it could be other solutions, and what he did, he started another fire, and that fire made it impossible for the first fire to spread to where they were, like a fire against the fire, because if there is no wood, the first fire cannot reach because the wood is already consumed. So they survived, and that's nothing short of a miracle to, in the situation where it's grave, to think calmly. And that's also what happened over the Hudson River a couple of years ago, when an airline pilot called Sully had the terrible accident of first having one flock of birds flying into one engine, and then 10 seconds later, incredible strike of bad luck, another flock of birds going into the second engine. And that was the first time in man history that happened. It never happened before. What are the likelihood? 2 flocks of birds seldom go into any plane or even close to it. And birds over New York are rare. But this happened, and of course there was no preconceived adjustments to make in this. He held his head calm and he landed the airplane in the Hudson River. Everyone survived. And here comes the interesting part. This is why they made a movie with Tom Hanks about it, called Sully, I remember. It's incredibly interesting just for these reasons I'm telling here. Because he comes up to court still, Sully, although he saved all the lives. And the reason being that they discovered it could be a chance for him to take the plane to LaGuardia, which is one of the airports in New York. They presses him and they say, we done an experiment here in was one of those automatic artificial cabins, and we show that it's actually possible for you to turn the plane 180 degrees, lower the speed and get down to LaGuardia with that energy you still have in the plane and that leverage you have, that height, you could land happily on LaGuardia. And then Sully responded, okay, that's very good, but how many times did you retry before you found the solution in this artificial cockpit? Because he had almost lost the whole court before. The whole case was lost when they said that. We found out that you could have landed the plane at LaGuardia. That would have put him into prison, or at least he would have lost his license forever. But he responded. He kept his head clear, even in the courtroom. And this goes to show, if you don't do much preemptive thinking, it gives you so many more choices. First, to reach the knowledge inside of you, and also to put in there exactly what's needed. He just stood up and calmly asked, how many times was this experiment done before you managed? And they said 17 times. How many times did he have to his disposal?
No, zero. One try.
One. He had only one try. And they put the whole case down directly. It was lost at that instant. The other turn, he just walked out. There was nothing more to do. And if he had forgotten to say that at that instance, he would have lost the case, and maybe he would have gotten a retrial. But it needed to come there. Retrials are very, very hard to make, like another court in a high court, another case in another court. It needs to be done there. So it goes to show he had the mentality, he had the thinking capacity to solve the problem directly. And in the movie, of course, it's excellently made by Tom Hanks. You just shit, yes, you cheer. This is a fantastic feeling. But this is exactly what we're talking about here. It's you only have one tryout, and it's like we have a general sense of what we should do. And then we try again, and then we try again, and then we try again. What we need to do is think otherwise. We need to stop the thinking process, and from the inside ourselves, a solution will come automatically. And we choose the better solution. We will be able to choose our response. And that is obviously the same thing as I've been talking about the Alexander technique. Once you're slowing the thinking process down and the system realizes that and you start inhibiting, your system will notice it's painful not to start with the back, that it kills the movement, that the movements become ungainly, horrible and discoordinated, tense, everything. And this is, in a way, sort of understanding coming from the Kleinbotter. Here you see that action could be this one going into the atmosphere, and this is thinking. So they are connected in a way, and they could be improved when we try to improve the both things in concert together. Thinking and acting are the same in one view, but they're also different in another view. And actually the Klein bottle helped me to understand this. And this is also biologically the same as the T1 is being the same as N1 and T2 being the same as N2, which is very hard to grip without the help of this one. I'd say it's impossible. So what happens if we slow down the thinking process is that the whole of reality comes in, not only the parts we want to do. And when the whole is coming in back, we can see that I don't want to do that part of reality. When I say part, I mean both space and time. I can go back to the whole, the gestalt, and I can choose something else. And it's a little bit similar to the bird flying around looking for something. Sometimes it needs to go back and readjust everything. And without this, we will be almost like one of those automatic vacuum cleaners that always go into the same corner. Once, like 10 times. We need to do it only one time. That's more effective. One could say that we are forcing, in a way, the T1 and 2, the T1 and 1, or the T2 and 2 to come together. And when they come together, they heal themselves. That's another way of expressing the whole thing. But we can also say that we go to the whole, and going to the whole, going to the 0 point, as the Bono say, we will be able to make another conception. And another conception is the same thing as a new action / thinking. So this is a fantastic way to hinder conditioning. It's a tool to open up conditioning, see what conditioning is, and see that there are choices within what doesn't look like choices from the beginning. Sully in the movie, he didn't shake his hand, what could I done otherwise? What he did instead, he went into action, and he was very fit, and it was a big surprise to everyone. This, I might tell you, was a big court. It's a big court. I don't know how many lawyers there was on the other side, but it was a whole team coming from the airline. The airlines are kanemochi, as they say in Japan, heavy on the money. This is, oddly enough, very similar also, and I think that could help in the explanation between the difference between LH and RH, the right hemisphere and the left hemisphere. So we are attending to the small parts, i.e. the left hemisphere, a little bit too much, and that goes for time and space. So we get too into that, and we can't back and see, oh, there's a hole. And when there's a hole, there are other solutions, other actions, other thinking alleys. So we need to understand, this could open up for an understanding that there is a gestalt always going on, and that the gestalt could always give you more time and more choices. So what we need to do is stop making a division, and this is another aspect. We need to stop divisions between what is important and what's not important, because that is habituated because of dysponesia. And in this training process, we cannot say this action was the important one and the other one was not, because we need to see that every action is using your body, your thinking process. That means that we cannot jump to certain actions that we prefer. We need to do all actions in our daily life from the moment we wake up to the moment we go to sleep, consciously. And therefore I can't say that, I think this is a good example, the mess I created here is not part of the whole, whereas standing here and performing the lecture is. Therefore, I would teach the system this is unimportant, there are actions that are unimportant, and you send the signals to the system not to care about any action, because the system doesn't know which action is important, because you're going to lower your threshold for what you can perceive. And I think this is partly the reason in the Eastern countries they put so much attention to details. And I always felt those details were unnecessary. But I started to understand they are not, because of this. The system doesn't know which details are important or not. And if you don't care about the mess I'm making here, I will tell the system not to care about these too. The system doesn't know. So at least in the training period, we need to be meticulous. Because every time we are meticulous on top of that, and that's a third aspect, we train ourselves into have a thinking, I will order these in color order or alphabetical order, and then I see my hand does it. That's a positive feedback. Whereas I just drop my pen like this, I give the feedback to the system, don't care. That's a sloppy thinking. So what they do in Asiatic countries is sharpening thinking / action skill, to making those go in concert. So they can be sure when something unexpected turns up, or you're doing something you really want to, or the lecture, that will be better. And there is an improvement to make. Obviously there's an improvement. If this method can make a paragletic walk again, that works. There are different aspects that we can polish, so to speak, of what we do. Doing more orderly, doing it more consciously. Brushing your teeth, for instance. Ordering your stuff. Thinking what you should do and then perform it. That's what it is about, more or less. That's helpful. The third aspect is something that helps the process. The two first aspects are essential, but this is helpful. That's an extra. And that extra actually reminds me a little bit about James Clear, when he talked about the British football team. No, cycling team it was. They were doing the 1% rule. And that meant they improved all stuff in their life. Not only what they thought was important for the cycling. And that's the clue. That's the clue. He found something very, very important there that helped to turn the fortune of the British cycling team around completely. So try to improve your action, because that's going to enforce intention, action and reward also. And this is the other thing you can also do apart from this. And well, it's also part of this, but that's enforced training, but in a limited scale, in a limited time period. Possibly no more than half an hour or 1 hour, which has a definite start and an end. There you press yourself beyond what you can support normally. And the reason you can do that is you know it's going to end, and that there is a reward afterward. The reward is something different. You have to have some reward for that. Also a lesson from James Clear and Kahneman. The reward is important. You need to have some sort of carrot to do that. And it's almost like having a gym pass. You go down there for 45 minutes and you get the reward afterwards. You go have a hamburger or something. This is also a good way of turboing, making stronger these other things. And that you train extra hard for a moment. But here you need to make a break. You should not do it all day. That's very important. It should end and you should feel revealed. Yeah, that's a good point. You should feel revealed when you don't have to do it anymore. There should be a sense of relief, because then you know you pushed yourself a little bit. Yeah, James Clear had point with this pushing the limits. He also had a system where you regularly improved everything, and then you have certain time limit, a limited amount of time when you pushed extra, and then that was in a sort of a compartment with a start and an end. And inside that you did that, and then you had a break. Breaks are important. Well, we had breaks for centuries. And this is one thing I've been thinking of. It could be good to have regulated breaks during the day. Definite break where you don't do anything. And think about the siesta. That's a thing in all of Southern Europe here in the West. But breaks are common all over the world. And that break shows the body it can rest for a while. And if it can rest for a while, it knows that before. And that means the body and action can be a bit stronger. It can force itself to doing a little bit more, because it knows it's the break coming. The body always knows there's a break coming. Even if you're not conscious of that, the body will. And I call this last one, with a lack of term, forced development, forced time-limited development. That goes into the rest of the project like something individual apart. But this is an extra spice to make it work better. And we already do this with our exercises, because we don't exercise all day. We exercise for a limited time period with a start and an end and a reward, hopefully. And it's interesting. I had no idea about the system learning. Well, maybe an intuitive thing. I looked at some of the videos from Ken Ware's Institute in Australia, in the Gold Coast. I think that's in the southwest, southeast. And the development is actually quite astounding in a quick time period. At least the first bigger development you have in the beginning. But of course, at the Institute you get a lot of encouragement, and you can maybe take it a bit further, I don't know. But this is amazing. And this is what I mentioned here is the first level. And that's good enough for us. I will also mention the second level at some other time. It's also very interesting, because that tells us a lot about chaotic systems. He and this Sarah Ross and also some other research, they want to know what's happening. And especially the locomotion, this first paragletic sportsman, his development was just over the top. So everybody got interested in this, of course. And there, by that came research. So if you get somebody famous to walk again, you don't have to worry anymore. And now there is, of course, a lot of people walking who's not famous, and all other different stuff. But so far it turned out to be quite interesting, this Canberra project. I'm glad I took it up again. Been lying dormant for, I think, a year maybe, or two. Well, I say thank you very much, and I wish you a pleasant afternoon. Thank you.